The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Red Creek Trading Post with a violence that sent Grace Whitmore tumbling from her seat onto the dusty ground of Wyoming territory, her worn carpetbag spilling its meager contents across the hard-packed earth. It was July of 1878, and the summer sun beat down mercilessly on her back as she scrambled to gather her few possessions. A faded photograph of her parents, a tattered Bible, 3 letters of reference that felt increasingly worthless with each passing day, and the last $5 to her name. She had come west with promises of a teaching position in a schoolhouse that she discovered, upon arrival 3 days prior, had burned to the ground 2 months ago. The man who had written those letters offering her employment had died in that very fire, and now she found herself stranded in a territory where she knew no one, with barely enough money for a week's lodging and no prospects whatsoever. "Watch yourself, miss," a deep voice said from above her, and Grace looked up to see a tall figure blocking out the sun. The man crouched down beside her, his movements easy and unhurried despite the heat, and began helping her collect the scattered papers that danced in the hot breeze. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy: dusty denim trousers, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows revealing sun-browned forearms, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. When he handed her the photograph of her parents, she caught a glimpse of his features. Strong jaw darkened with several days' stubble, sun-creased eyes the color of weathered wood, and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to serious expressions than smiles. He appeared to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, with the lean, hard build of someone who spent long days in the saddle. "Thank you," Grace managed, taking the photograph with trembling fingers. She felt the sting of tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of a stranger, would not show weakness when she needed to appear capable and self-sufficient. But the kindness in his gesture, small as it was, threatened to undo the careful control she had maintained since discovering her predicament. "You hurt?" he asked, his gaze sharp as it swept over her, checking for injury. His voice carried the slow drawl of someone who had spent time in Texas, though it was softened somewhat by years in other territories. "No, I am fine," she replied, brushing dust from her dark green traveling dress. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows and hem, but she had kept it as clean and presentable as possible. It was one of only 2 dresses she owned, the other being even more threadbare. "Just my pride, I suppose." The corner of his mouth quirked slightly. "Pride heals faster than broken bones." He stood and offered her his hand. Grace hesitated only a moment before accepting it, feeling the calloused strength of his palm as he pulled her effortlessly to her feet. "Name is Brennan. I work the cattle ranch about 5 miles north of here." "Grace Whitmore," she said, withdrawing her hand and clasping both of hers together at her waist. She could feel the eyes of other townspeople on them now, curious gazes from the handful of people who had paused in their daily routines to watch the small drama unfold. Red Creek was not a large town, perhaps 200 souls at most, and a stranger tumbling from a stagecoach was likely the most interesting thing to happen all week. Brennan handed her the carpetbag, which he had repacked with surprising care. "You just arriving in Red Creek, Miss Whitmore?" "I arrived 3 days ago," she admitted. "I had secured a teaching position through correspondence, but when I arrived, I discovered the schoolhouse had burned and the man who hired me had perished in the fire. I have been staying at the boarding house while I determine what to do next." She saw something shift in his expression, a flicker of sympathy that he quickly masked. That would be Harold Peterson. He was a good man. The whole town mourned his loss. Cole paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Are you planning to head back east then?" Grace felt her chest tighten. "I have no home to return to. My parents died last winter of influenza, and I sold everything to pay their medical bills and funeral expenses. The teaching position was meant to be a fresh start." She had not meant to reveal so much, but there was something about the steady way he looked at her that invited honesty. Or perhaps it was simply that she was tired of carrying the weight of her situation alone. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as if weighing something in his mind. Then he said, "Mrs. Henderson, who runs the general store, was just saying yesterday that she needed help. Her daughter moved to Denver to get married, and she has been running the place alone. It would not pay much, but it would be steady work. Room and board included if you wanted it." Grace stared at him. "You would do that? Recommend me to her when you know nothing about me?" "I know you have references," Cole said with a slight nod toward her bag. "And I know you came all this way on the promise of honest work. That speaks to character. Besides, Mrs. Henderson is sharp as a tack. She will make her own judgment about whether to hire you or not. I am just making an introduction." Before Grace could formulate a response, he had already started walking toward the general store, carrying himself with the loose-limbed confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. Grace hurried to follow, her carpetbag bumping against her leg with each step. The general store was a sturdy wooden building with a covered porch and large windows displaying various goods. Bolts of fabric, tools, canned goods, and other necessities. A bell jangled as Cole pushed open the door, and the dim, cooler interior smelled of wood, leather, and the faint sweetness of peppermint. A woman in her late 50s looked up from behind the counter where she had been sorting through a ledger. She had steel-gray hair pulled back in a sensible bun, sharp blue eyes, and the capable air of someone who had run a business successfully for many years. "Cole Brennan, what brings you to town in the middle of a workday?" she asked with the familiarity of long acquaintance. "Found someone who might solve your problem, Mrs. Henderson," Cole said, gesturing to Grace. "This is Miss Grace Whitmore. She came west to take the teaching position, but as you know, that situation did not work out. She has references and needs work. You need help." Seemed like it might be a good match. Mrs. Henderson's keen gaze fixed on Grace, assessing her from head to toe in a way that made Grace straighten her spine and meet the woman's eyes directly. She had nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of, despite her circumstances. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only seconds, Mrs. Henderson said, "Let me see those references." Grace quickly retrieved the letters from her bag and handed them over. Mrs. Henderson read each one slowly and thoroughly while Cole waited by the door, his hat now in his hands, turning the brim absently between his fingers. Grace tried not to fidget, tried to project the calm competence that her former employers had praised in their letters. She had worked as a companion to an elderly woman, as a seamstress in a dress shop, and had helped manage a small lending library before securing the teaching position. The references were genuine and positive, but would they be enough? "You can read and write well, I assume, Mrs. Henderson asked, looking up from the letters. "Yes, ma'am. I can also manage accounts, inventory, and I am familiar with common bookkeeping practices. I am a quick learner and not afraid of hard work." "The pay is $30 a month plus room and board," Mrs. Henderson said bluntly. "The room is small, just above the store. You would work 6 days a week, opening at 7 in the morning and closing at 6 in the evening, except Sundays. I attend church services and expect you would do the same if you are living under my roof. The work includes stocking shelves, helping customers, keeping the books, occasional sewing or mending of items I sell, and general cleaning. You would get 1 full day off each week and a half day on Wednesdays. Is that acceptable?" Grace felt relief wash through her so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. "More than acceptable, ma'am. Thank you. I promise you will not regret this decision." "I do not make decisions I regret," Mrs. Henderson said dryly. "When can you start?" "Immediately, if you wish, Mrs. Henderson nodded. "Good. Bring your things from the boarding house. You can settle into your room and start tomorrow morning. That will give you the rest of today to get oriented." She turned to Cole. "Thank you for the introduction, Cole. I appreciate you thinking of me." "It was no trouble," Cole said, settling his hat back on his head. "I should get back to the ranch. We are moving cattle to the northern pasture this week. He glanced at Grace and something in his expression softened. "Welcome to Red Creek, Miss Whitmore. I hope it treats you well." "Thank you, Mr. Brennan," Grace said, infusing her voice with all the gratitude she felt. "I am truly grateful for your help today. I do not know what would have happened if you had not stopped to assist me." He shook his head slightly. "Anyone would have done the same." Then he was gone, the bell jangling behind him as he stepped back into the bright sunlight, leaving Grace alone with her new employer, and the overwhelming relief of knowing she would not be destitute and homeless in a strange territory. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Grace learned the rhythms of running the general store. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a fair if exacting employer, with high standards and little patience for sloppiness or laziness. Grace threw herself into the work with determination, rising before dawn to sweep and dust, opening the store precisely at 7, spending her days helping customers with unfailing courtesy, restocking shelves, recording transactions in the ledger with meticulous care, and closing each evening after ensuring everything was in perfect order. The room above the store was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small trunk for her belongings. But it was clean and private and hers, which made it feel like a palace compared to the uncertainty she had faced. She saw Cole Brennan only once during those first 2 weeks when he came in to purchase tobacco and a few other supplies. Grace was helping another customer at the time, measuring out flour from a large barrel, but she felt his presence the moment he entered the store. When she finally was able to turn her attention to him, she found him waiting patiently near the counter, his hat in his hands again in that gesture she was beginning to recognize as habitual. "Good morning, Mr. Brennan," she said with a smile. "What can I help you find today?" "Morning, Miss Whitmore," he replied, returning her smile with a small one of his own. "I need tobacco, a tin of coffee, 2 pounds of sugar, and a new whetstone. The old one finally gave up." Grace gathered the items efficiently, her movements sure now that she knew where everything was kept. As she wrapped the sugar and coffee in brown paper and tied the parcels with string, she said, "I wanted to thank you again for helping me that day. Mrs. Henderson is an excellent employer and I am very happy here. I owe you a great debt." She saw something flicker across his face, an expression she could not quite read. "You do not owe me anything, Miss Whitmore. I am glad things worked out for you, but I just made an introduction. You got the job on your own merit." "Still, I would like to repay your kindness somehow," Grace insisted. "Perhaps I could mend something for you, or if you need anything at all, please let me know." Cole was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "There is no debt between us. I helped because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected anything in return. You do not need to repay kindness." Grace felt a flush rise to her cheeks, uncertain whether she had offended him somehow. "I did not mean to suggest that your motives were anything but generous. I simply wished to express my gratitude in a tangible way." His expression softened. "Your gratitude is appreciated, but it is also not necessary. I hope you will settle in well here in Red Creek." He paid for his purchases and tipped his hat to her before leaving, and Grace was left feeling strangely unsettled by the exchange. That evening, as she helped Mrs. Henderson close the store, Grace mentioned the conversation. "I think I may have offended Mr. Brennan today. I offered to repay him for his help, and he seemed displeased." Mrs. Henderson paused in her sweeping and gave Grace a considering look. "Cole Brennan is a good man, one of the best I know. He has been working at the Rockingham Ranch for about 5 years now, ever since he came up from Texas. He works hard, keeps to himself mostly, and has a reputation for being fair and honest in all his dealings. If he seemed displeased, it was likely because he genuinely does not want payment or thanks beyond simple courtesy. Some folks are like that. They do what is right because it is right, not because they expect anything back." Grace pondered this as she finished her evening chores. She had grown up in a world where social debts and obligations were carefully tracked and repaid, where every favor incurred an expectation of reciprocation. The idea that someone could help her simply because it was the right thing to do, with no expectation of return, was both foreign and strangely moving. August brought scorching heat to Wyoming territory, the kind that made work in the store feel like laboring in an oven despite the shade. Grace learned to prop open the door and windows early in the morning to catch any hint of breeze, and to offer water to customers who came in looking sun-dazed and weary. She was beginning to recognize the regular customers now, to learn their names and their preferences, to understand the rhythms of this small community. There was Mr. Thompson, who ran the livery stable, always smelling of horses and hay. There was young Sarah Chen, whose family ran the laundry, a bright-eyed girl of about 16 who always had a smile and a cheerful word. There was Pastor Williams and his wife Martha, dignified and kind, who ran the small church that served as the spiritual center of the community. And there was Cole Brennan, who came to town every 2 weeks or so for supplies. Each time he entered the store, Grace felt that same awareness, that heightened consciousness of his presence. She told herself it was simply gratitude, that her awareness was born of the debt she still felt she owed him. But she could not quite ignore the way her pulse quickened when she heard his voice, or the way she found herself listening for the jangle of the bell that might signal his arrival. It was during one of these visits, in mid-August, that Grace learned more about the man who had so significantly altered the course of her life. She was ringing up his purchases when Mrs. Henderson emerged from the back room carrying a bolt of blue fabric. "Cole, would you mind taking this to the ranch for me?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "Mrs. Sullivan ordered it for new curtains, and I know you are headed that way. It would save her a trip to town in this heat." "Happy to," Cole said, taking the fabric and tucking it under his arm. "How is the new foreman working out?" Mrs. Henderson asked, and Grace realized with surprise that Cole must have been promoted. "Well enough," Cole replied. "The men respect him and he knows cattle. We should have a good drive this fall if the weather holds." After he left, Grace turned to Mrs. Henderson with curiosity. "I did not realize Mr. Brennan was a foreman." "Just promoted last month," Mrs. Henderson confirmed. "He was the best man for the job. The ranch owner, Mr. Sullivan, recognized that Cole has a good head on his shoulders and a way with both cattle and men. It is a position of significant responsibility. The Rocking M is one of the largest ranches in this part of Wyoming, running several thousand head of cattle." Grace filed this information away, her respect for Cole Brennan growing. He was clearly a man who had earned his position through hard work and competence, not through connections or luck. It made her feel even more grateful that such a man had taken the time to help her. The next time Cole came to town, Grace had a surprise prepared for him. She had noticed that the shirts he wore, while clean, were often missing buttons or had small tears that had been clumsily mended, clearly the work of a man more skilled with rope than needle. So she had taken it upon herself, during her evening hours when the store was closed, to sew him a new shirt. She had used her own meager wages to purchase the fabric, a sturdy cotton in a deep blue that she thought would suit him, and had spent hours cutting and stitching by lamplight, using a pattern she had memorized from her days working in the dress shop. The shirt was well made, with even stitches and reinforced seams that would stand up to hard use. When Cole entered the store on a warm morning in late August, Grace felt her heart begin to race with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She waited until he had gathered his usual supplies and approached the counter, then retrieved the wrapped package she had kept hidden beneath. "Mr. Brennan, I made something for you," she said, pushing the package across the counter. "Please, before you refuse, let me explain. I noticed that your shirts often need mending, and I thought perhaps you might appreciate having a new one. I am quite skilled with a needle, and it brought me pleasure to make it. Consider it a gift from one friend to another, not a repayment of debt." She had practiced that little speech several times, hoping that by framing it as friendship rather than obligation, he might accept it more readily. Cole looked down at the package, then up at her face, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and Grace felt her nervousness increase. Had she overstepped? Was this inappropriate somehow? Finally, Cole reached out and took the package, unwrapping it slowly. When he saw the shirt, something shifted in his face, a softening around the eyes that made him look younger somehow. He ran one calloused hand over the fabric, testing the quality of the stitching with the careful attention of someone who understood good workmanship. "This is fine work, Miss Whitmore," he said quietly. "Too fine for me." "Not at all," Grace protested. "I made it to be worn and used, not admired. The fabric is sturdy and will hold up well to hard work. I hope it fits properly. I estimated the measurements based on observation, so it may need adjustment." Cole folded the shirt carefully and placed it back in the wrapping. When he looked at her again, his expression was serious. "Thank you. This is very kind of you, but I want you to understand something. You do not owe me anything. I did not help you that day expecting or wanting anything in return." "I know that," Grace said softly. "That is precisely why I wanted to do this. Not because I feel obligated, but because your kindness moved me, and I wanted to express my appreciation in a way that might actually be useful to you. If you truly do not want it, I will not be offended, but I hope you will accept it in the spirit it was given." There was a long pause, and Grace held her breath, waiting. Then Cole nodded slowly. "I will accept it, and I thank you. It is a generous gift." He hesitated, then added, "Would you perhaps like to join me for supper at the hotel restaurant sometime? They serve a decent meal on Saturday evenings." "It seems only fair that I should reciprocate your kindness." Grace felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with obligation or debt. "I would like that very much, Mr. Brennan." "Cole," he corrected gently. "If we are friends, as you said, then please call me Cole." "Then you must call me Grace," she replied with a smile. They arranged to meet the following Saturday evening, and after Cole left the store, Grace found herself unable to stop smiling. Mrs. Henderson, who had been observing the exchange from her position near the back shelves, came forward with an expression of approval. "Cole Brennan is a good man," she said simply. "I am glad to see him taking an interest in someone. He has been alone too long, I think." "It is just supper between friends," Grace protested, but she felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly. "Of course it is, dear, of course it is." Saturday arrived with agonizing slowness. Grace found herself distracted throughout the week, her mind wandering to the upcoming supper at odd moments. She told herself repeatedly that it was simply a meal between friends, that Cole was only being polite in reciprocating her gift, but her racing heart suggested her feelings were more complicated than simple friendship. On Saturday morning, she rose even earlier than usual and took extra care with her appearance, washing her hair and pressing her best dress, the dark green one she had worn the day she arrived, though she had since mended and refreshed it until it looked almost new. The day seemed to crawl by with deliberate slowness. Grace helped customers with her usual courtesy, but her mind was elsewhere, rehearsing possible conversations and worrying about whether she would say something foolish. What did one talk about with a cowboy over supper? She knew nothing of cattle or ranching, and her life in the East seemed impossibly distant and irrelevant to the world he inhabited. When 6 o'clock finally arrived and Mrs. Henderson released her for the evening, Grace hurried upstairs to change and prepare. She brushed her dark hair until it shone, pinning it up in a simple but elegant style that framed her face. She had no jewelry except for her mother's small silver locket, which she fastened around her neck. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a young woman with anxious brown eyes and flushed cheeks, and she took a deep breath to steady herself. Cole was waiting outside the general store when she descended, and the sight of him made her breath catch. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance as well. He wore dark trousers, polished boots, and the blue shirt she had made him. Seeing him where it sent a warm feeling through her chest. He had shaved and his hair was neatly combed, and when he saw her, his face lit with a smile that transformed his usually serious features into something almost boyish. "You look lovely," he said, offering his arm. "Are you ready?" "Thank you." "You look very handsome yourself," Grace replied, placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. The simple contact sent a shiver through her despite the warm evening air. "I must confess I am a bit nervous. I have not been to the hotel restaurant yet." "It is nothing fancy," Cole assured her as they began walking down the dusty main street toward the two-story building that served as Red Creek's hotel. "But the food is good and honest, and the proprietor, Mrs. Dawson, is a fine cook. They serve family style on Saturday evenings, so we will be eating with other folks." The hotel dining room was indeed simple but clean, with several long tables covered in checkered cloths and mismatched chairs. About a dozen other people were already gathered, and Grace recognized several faces from the store. Mrs. Dawson, a plump woman with a kind face and flour-dusted hands, greeted them warmly and directed them to seats at one of the tables. Soon platters of food began arriving: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. It was simple fare but plentiful and well-prepared, and Grace realized she was hungrier than she had thought. Conversation flowed easily around the table, with various townspeople discussing the weather, the upcoming harvest, news from other territories, and local gossip. Cole proved to be a good conversationalist when drawn out, with a dry wit that made Grace laugh and a store of stories from his years working cattle. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride almost before he could walk, about the long cattle drives north and the challenges of working with animals that seemed determined to do everything except what you wanted them to do. "What brought you to Wyoming?" Grace asked as they lingered over coffee after the meal, the dining room slowly emptying as other diners finished and departed. Cole was quiet for a moment, his fingers turning the coffee cups slowly on the table. "I wanted a change," he said finally. "Texas holds some difficult memories for me. My father died when I was young, thrown from a horse. My mother raised me and my two sisters on her own, working herself half to death to keep food on the table. By the time I was old enough to really help, she was worn out from years of struggle. She passed when I was 22. My sisters both married and moved away, started their own families. I felt like I was just drifting, going through the motions. So I came north looking for something different, a chance to build something of my own." "I am so sorry about your parents," Grace said softly, thinking of her own recent losses. "It is difficult to lose the people who anchor us to the world. You understand that better than most, I think," Cole said, his warm brown eyes meeting hers with compassion. "You have had your own share of loss recently." Grace nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in her throat that came whenever she thought of her parents. "It still feels unreal sometimes. I keep expecting to turn around and see my mother working on her needlepoint, or hear my father's voice reading aloud from the newspaper. They were good people who deserved better than dying young from a cruel illness." "Tell me about them," Cole said, and Grace found herself talking, really talking, for the first time since their deaths. She told him about her father's quiet kindness, his love of books and learning, his work as a clerk that barely supported them but gave him satisfaction. She told him about her mother's grace and patience, her skill with a needle, her ability to make a home feel warm and welcoming even when they had little. She talked until her coffee grew cold, and Cole listened with his full attention, asking occasional questions but mostly just being present in a way that felt like a gift. When she finally ran out of words, she felt both exhausted and lighter, as if she had set down a heavy burden she had been carrying alone for too long. "I apologize," she said, wiping at her eyes with her napkin. "I did not mean to monopolize the conversation with sad stories." "Do not apologize," Cole said firmly. "Grief needs to be spoken sometimes. It is good to remember the people we have lost, to honor them with our words and memories. Your parents sound like they were fine people who raised a fine daughter." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Thank you for listening, and thank you for this evening. It has been lovely." "It has," Cole agreed. He signaled for the check and paid despite Grace's protests, then offered his arm again as they stepped out into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the heat of the day was finally giving way to the pleasant chill of a high-altitude night. They walked slowly back toward the general store, neither of them in a hurry to end the evening. When they reached the store, Cole paused at the bottom of the outside stairs that led to Grace's room. "I enjoyed this very much, Grace. Would you perhaps like to do it again sometime?" "I would love that," Grace said, and meant it with her whole heart. Cole smiled, that rare, transforming smile that made her feel warm all over. "Good, I am glad." He hesitated, then added, "I want you to know that tonight was not about reciprocating your gift. I asked you to supper because I wanted to spend time with you to get to know you better." "I hope you understand the difference." "I do," Grace said softly. "And I am glad you asked me." After Cole left, Grace climbed the stairs to her room feeling like she was floating. She prepared for bed in a happy daze, replaying the evening in her mind, remembering the way Cole had looked at her, the way he had listened with such focused attention, the way his rare smiles had made her heart skip beats. She was beginning to understand that what she felt for Cole Brennan went far beyond gratitude. She was attracted to him, drawn to his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness, to the way he treated her as an equal deserving of respect and consideration. It was both thrilling and terrifying. The following weeks established a new pattern. Cole began coming to town more frequently, often on days when he did not strictly need supplies, and he and Grace would steal moments of conversation between her duties at the store. On Sundays after church services, they would walk together through the town or along the creek that gave Red Creek its name, talking about everything and nothing. Cole told her about his work at the ranch, about the satisfaction of working with animals and land, about his dreams of perhaps owning his own small spread someday. Grace told him about her life back east, about her love of books and learning, about the children she had hoped to teach. "Do you miss it?" Cole asked one Sunday afternoon as they sat beside the creek, watching the water flow past. "Teaching, I mean." "I miss the idea of it," Grace admitted. "I have always loved learning, and the thought of helping children discover that same love appealed to me. But I am content at the general store. Mrs. Henderson is teaching me about running a business, and I find I have an aptitude for it. Perhaps someday I might run my own shop." "You would be good at it," Cole said with certainty. "You have a way with people, a way of making them feel heard and valued." "That is a rare gift." Grace felt herself blush at the compliment. "You are very kind." "I am just honest," Cole replied. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Grace, I need to ask you something, and I hope you will be honest with me in return." "Of course," Grace said, feeling a flutter of nervousness. "Why do you keep trying to do things for me? I know you mended my spare shirts without telling me because I found them in my saddlebag last week with your stitching. And Mrs. Dawson mentioned that you paid for half of our supper that first night, though I had already settled the bill." Grace felt heat rise to her face. "I wanted to help. You have done so much for me." "Grace," Cole said gently, turning to face her fully. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "I need you to understand something. I do not help you because I expect anything in return. I do not keep score of who does what for whom. When I spend time with you, it is because I enjoy your company, not because I feel obligated. And I worry that by constantly trying to repay me, you are making this into a transaction rather than what it really is." "What is it really?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole's thumb stroked across her knuckles, sending shivers up her arm. "It is a relationship, Grace. A friendship that I hope might become something more if you feel the same way, but relationships are not about keeping a ledger balanced." They are about giving freely without expectation because you care about the other person's happiness and well-being. Do you understand what I am saying? Grace felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. I think I do. I am sorry. I have been so focused on not being in your debt that I have missed the point entirely, have I not? This was never about debt for you. No, Cole said simply. It never was. From the moment I saw you fall from that stagecoach, dusty and determined not to cry, I was drawn to you. I wanted to help because I could see you were someone worth helping, someone with courage and strength who had been dealt an unfair hand. And as I have gotten to know you these past weeks, that attraction has only grown stronger. I care about you, Grace. Not because of anything you have done or given me, but simply because of who you are. Grace felt her heart swell with emotion. I care about you too, Cole, very much. I think I have been trying to repay you because I did not feel like I deserved your regard any other way. I came here with nothing and you helped me find my footing. It felt like too great a gift to accept without giving something equal in return. But that is exactly my point, Cole said, his voice intense. Love is not a transaction. It is not about equal exchanges or balanced accounts. It is about giving because you want to, because making the other person happy brings you joy. Can you accept that? Can you let yourself receive freely without feeling the need to repay? I can try, Grace said softly. I want to. It is just that I have never had someone give to me so freely before, without strings attached. It is taking time for me to understand that your kindness is not a loan that must be repaid with interest. Cole smiled and lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned and courtly, and it made Grace's heart race. Then we will work on it together, he said. Because I want you to understand, truly understand, that what I feel for you has nothing to do with debt or obligation. I am falling in love with you, Grace Whitmore, and love is not something you can repay or balance out. It is something you can only receive and, if you choose, return. I am falling in love with you too, Grace whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and wonderful to say aloud. I think I have been for weeks now, but I was afraid to acknowledge it, afraid that I was confusing gratitude with something deeper. And now, Cole asked, his eyes searching hers. Now I know the difference, Grace said with certainty. What I feel when I am with you, the way my heart lifts when I see you, the way I think about you constantly when we are apart, the way I want to know everything about you and share everything about myself with you. That is not gratitude. That is love, or the beginning of it. Cole's face broke into a wide smile and he leaned forward, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Grace did not pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was like coming home. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. I should probably ask your permission to court you properly, Cole said, his forehead resting against hers. Though I suppose I have been courting you already without formally declaring my intentions. I would be honored to be courted by you, Cole Brennan, Grace said with a laugh. And yes, I believe you have been courting me, though I was too focused on repaying my perceived debt to realize what was happening. They sat by the creek until the sun began to set, talking and planning and stealing kisses that grew gradually less shy and more confident. When Cole finally walked her back to the general store, both of them were giddy with the newness of acknowledged love. And when Mrs. Henderson saw Grace's glowing face, she smiled knowingly but said nothing, allowing Grace her privacy and her happiness. The next several months were the happiest Grace had ever known. She and Cole courted openly, spending every possible moment together. Cole would ride into town on his days off and they would walk together, eat meals together, attend church socials and town events together. Grace learned about ranching and cattle, learned to appreciate the satisfaction Cole took in his work. Cole learned about Grace's love of books and education, and surprised her by borrowing volumes from the small collection Pastor Williams kept and reading them so they could discuss the stories together. Grace also learned to accept Cole's kindnesses without immediately trying to repay them. It was harder than she had expected, fighting against a lifetime of conditioning that said gifts required reciprocation. But Cole was patient with her, gently pointing out each time she started to fall into old patterns, reminding her that love was not a ledger to be balanced. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch of the general store watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Cole brought up something that had clearly been on his mind. "Grace, I want to tell you something, but I need you to listen without trying to figure out how to repay me or even things out. Can you do that?" Grace felt a flutter of nervousness but nodded. "I will try." "Mr. Sullivan has offered to sell me a portion of the ranch," Cole said, his voice careful. "About 500 acres on the eastern edge of the property, with good water and grazing. It would give me a chance to build my own operation, to have something that is truly mine. The price is fair, more than fair really, and he is willing to let me pay over time. But it would mean all my savings and then some. It would mean years of hard work and struggle to build it into something profitable." "That is wonderful, Cole," Grace exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. "That is what you have wanted, a chance to build something of your own." "It is," Cole agreed. "But there is more. I want to build it not just for myself, but for us, for our future together. Grace, I know we have only been courting for a few months and this might be too soon, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me? Will you help me build this ranch into a home?" Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Cole pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple band of gold with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's," he said softly. "My sisters agreed I should have it, knowing I would give it to the woman I wanted to marry. I know it is not much, but—" "It is perfect," Grace interrupted, holding out her hand so he could slip it onto her finger. "Absolutely perfect. I am honored to wear your mother's ring." They sealed the engagement with a kiss that left them both breathless, and when they finally pulled apart, Cole said seriously, "Grace, I need you to understand what you are agreeing to. Building a ranch from the ground up is going to be hard work. We will not have much money for years. We will be living in a small cabin, probably just a few rooms at first. You will have to work as hard as I do to make it succeed. It will not be an easy life, at least not at first." "I know," Grace said firmly. "But I would rather work hard beside you, building something together, than have an easy life without you. I am not afraid of hard work, Cole. I never have been. What frightens me is the thought of losing what we have found together." Cole gathered her into his arms, holding her close. "You will not lose me," he promised. "I am yours for as long as you will have me." They were married in November, in the small church with Pastor Williams officiating and what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Grace wore a new dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, a soft blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and she carried a bouquet of the last wildflowers of the season that Cole had ridden out early to gather for her. Cole wore his best suit, looking handsome and proud and slightly nervous as he waited at the altar for Grace to walk down the aisle, when Grace spoke her vows, promising to love and honor Cole for the rest of her days. She meant every word with her whole heart. And when Cole slipped a second ring onto her finger, a simple gold band to accompany his mother's engagement ring, she felt like the luckiest woman alive. The reception was held in the hotel dining room, with food contributed by various townspeople and fiddle music for dancing. Grace danced with Cole until her feet ached, both of them laughing and giddy with joy. Mrs. Henderson had tears in her eyes when she hugged Grace and told her she was losing the best assistant she had ever had, but gaining a wonderful friend. Pastor Williams and his wife Martha wished them every happiness. Mr. Sullivan, Cole's employer and now his partner in the ranch venture, clapped Cole on the shoulder and told him he had chosen well. That night, Grace and Cole traveled to the small cabin on the land that was now theirs, arriving under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms that Cole had been working on for weeks to make ready, but to Grace it was beautiful. Cole had built the furniture himself: a bed, a table, chairs, shelves. He had installed a sturdy stove for cooking and heating. He had even made curtains from fabric Grace had chosen, hanging them somewhat crookedly but with obvious care. "It is not much yet," Cole said, watching her face anxiously as she looked around. "But we will add on as we can. In a few years, I want to build you a proper house with a parlor and a real kitchen and multiple bedrooms for the children I hope we will have." "It is perfect," Grace said and meant it. "It is ours, Cole. That makes it perfect." Their first year of marriage was indeed hard work, just as Cole had warned. They rose before dawn every day, Cole to tend to the cattle he was building his herd with, Grace to manage the household and help with every task that needed doing. She learned to ride a horse, though she never became as comfortable in the saddle as Cole. She learned to help with the cattle when needed, to mend fences, to manage their limited resources with careful planning. Cole continued to work for Mr. Sullivan several days a week to bring in steady money while they built their own operation. And on those days, Grace managed their own small herd alone, proving to herself and to Cole that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. There were difficult days when nothing seemed to go right, when the cattle broke through fences, or when unexpected expenses threatened to deplete their carefully saved money. There were days when Grace was so tired she could barely stand, when her hands were blistered and her back ached and she wondered if they had taken on more than they could handle. But there were far more good days, days when she and Cole worked side by side in comfortable companionship, when they made progress on expanding the cabin or improving their land, when they ended the day exhausted but satisfied. There were evenings spent sitting on their porch watching the sunset, talking about their dreams and plans. There were nights spent in each other's arms, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. Grace discovered that she loved this life in a way she had never expected. She loved the vast, open spaces of Wyoming, so different from the cramped city streets of her childhood. She loved the satisfaction of physical work, of building something tangible with her own hands. Most of all, she loved sharing it all with Cole, loved the partnership they had forged, the way they supported and strengthened each other. It was during one of these evenings, about 8 months into their marriage, that Grace learned a lesson that finally broke her of her habit of trying to repay every kindness. They had been working on expanding the chicken coop, hot and tired and covered in sawdust. Cole had been teaching Grace how to properly saw boards to length, patiently explaining the technique over and over until she got it right. When they finally finished for the day and washed up for supper, Grace said, "Thank you for teaching me today. I know I was slow to catch on." "How can I make it up to you?" Cole set down the towel he had been using and turned to face her with an expression more serious than the comment warranted. "Grace, we have been married for 8 months now, and you are still trying to repay me for every little thing. When will you understand that you do not owe me anything? That is not how this works." Grace felt defensive. "I was just trying to be considerate to show appreciation for your patience." "Appreciation is fine," Cole said, his voice still gentle but firm. "But constantly trying to make things up to me, to balance some invisible scale, that is not appreciation. That is treating our marriage like a business transaction. It suggests that you think my love for you is conditional, that I am only giving to you because I expect equal return." "Is that really what you think of me?" The question hit Grace like a physical blow. "No, of course not. I know you love me. I know your kindness is genuine." "Then why do you keep doing this?" Cole asked, and there was real frustration in his voice now mixed with hurt. "Every time I do something for you, every time I teach you something or help you or give you anything, you immediately start calculating how to repay me. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? It makes me feel like you do not trust my love, like you think I am keeping score." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "I do not mean to make you feel that way. I am just trying to be fair, to not be a burden." "A burden?" Cole stepped forward and took her shoulders gently, making her look up at him. "Grace, you are my wife. You are the person I chose to spend my life with, to build a future with. You are not a burden, and this is not about fairness in the sense you mean it. Marriage is not about keeping things perfectly equal at every moment. Sometimes I will give more, sometimes you will give more, and that is fine. It balances out over a lifetime, not day by day." "I know that intellectually," Grace said, wiping at her eyes, "but I cannot seem to stop myself from feeling like I owe you something. You saved me, Cole. When I came to Red Creek, I had nothing and no prospects, and you changed everything for me. How can I not feel like I owe you for that?" "Because I did not do it to put you in my debt," Cole said, his voice breaking slightly. "I did it because even in that first moment when you were dusty and trying so hard not to cry, I saw someone special, someone worth helping. And every moment since then has only confirmed that first impression. You are strong and brave and kind and clever. You work harder than anyone I know. You have made this house a home, have made my life richer and fuller than I ever imagined it could be. If anyone owes anyone anything, I owe you for choosing me, for agreeing to build this life with me." Grace felt something shift inside her, like a door opening that she had not realized was closed. "I think I have been so focused on what you did for me that I have not seen what I bring to our marriage. I have been thinking of myself as the recipient of your charity rather than as your equal partner." "Yes," Cole said simply. "That is exactly right, and it hurts, Grace. It hurts to feel like the person you love thinks they are only with you out of obligation or gratitude. I need to know that you are here because you want to be, because you love me, not because you feel like you owe me." "I do love you," Grace said fiercely, reaching up to cup his face with her hands. "I love you so much it sometimes scares me. I am here because I cannot imagine being anywhere else, because you are my home and my heart. Not because I feel obligated, but because loving you and being loved by you is the greatest gift I have ever received." "Then stop trying to repay me," Cole said, covering her hands with his. "Love is not a debt you owe, Grace. It is a gift you give freely, and it does not diminish you to receive it in return. Can you understand that? Can you let yourself accept my love without constantly trying to balance the scales?" Grace took a deep, shuddering breath. "I can try, I want to. I want to be the kind of partner you deserve, someone who gives and receives freely without all this calculation." "You are already the partner I deserve," Cole said, pulling her into his arms. "I just need you to see yourself the way I see you. Not as someone who owes me, but as someone who enriches my life simply by being in it." They held each other for a long time, and Grace felt something in her finally relax, finally let go of the fear that had been driving her need to constantly repay every kindness. Cole loved her not because she had earned it through service or repayment, but simply because she was Grace. That was a revelation both simple and profound, and accepting it felt like shedding a heavy coat she had been wearing for far too long. After that conversation, Grace made a conscious effort to change her mindset. It was not easy, and she sometimes still caught herself starting to calculate how to repay something, but now she recognized the pattern and could stop herself. She practiced accepting Cole's help and kindness with simple gratitude rather than immediately planning reciprocation. She learned to say thank you without adding how can I make it up to you. She learned to receive as well as give, to understand that balance in a relationship came from both partners giving freely, not from keeping a careful tally. As the months passed, their ranch began to thrive. They added more cattle to their herd, built a proper barn, and expanded the cabin to include a real bedroom and a larger kitchen. Grace proved to have a good head for the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to stretch their resources. Cole's reputation as a fair and skilled cattleman grew, and other ranchers began seeking his advice. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Cole on a warm May evening as they sat on their expanded porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Cole's face lit up with a joy so pure and complete that Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "We are going to have a baby," Cole repeated, as if testing the words. "Grace, we are going to be parents." "We are," Grace confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Cole said, pulling her carefully into his arms. "I am overwhelmed and terrified and more excited than I have ever been in my life." "We are going to have a family, Grace. A real family." The pregnancy was not easy, especially in the summer heat, but Grace continued to work as much as she was able, managing the household and helping with lighter ranch tasks. Cole became even more attentive, if that was possible, constantly worried about her health and comfort. Grace had to remind him several times that pregnancy was not an illness, that she was perfectly capable of managing herself. "I know you are capable," Cole said one evening when Grace had gently chided him for the third time that day about hovering. "But I cannot help worrying. You and this baby are the most important things in my world. Let me take care of you." Grace softened immediately. "I know and I appreciate your concern. Just remember that I am still me, still the same person who learned to mend fences and manage cattle. I will let you know if I need help, I promise, but I also need to feel useful and capable." They found a balance, as they had learned to do in all aspects of their marriage. Cole took on more of the physical labor, but Grace continued to manage the household and keep their accounts. As her pregnancy advanced, she spent more time on tasks that could be done sitting down. Sewing clothes for the baby, preserving vegetables from their garden, writing letters to Cole's sisters who were thrilled about the upcoming birth. In late November, as the first snows began to fall on Wyoming territory, Grace went into labor. Cole rode for Mrs. Henderson and Martha Williams, who had both agreed to attend the birth, and then spent the next 14 hours pacing anxiously in the main room of the cabin while Grace labored in their bedroom. It was a long and difficult birth, and there were moments when Cole heard Grace cry out and wanted to burst through the door despite Mrs. Henderson's firm instructions to stay put. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, Cole heard the sound he had been waiting for, a baby's cry. A few minutes later, Mrs. Henderson emerged, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Cole, a healthy boy with good lungs, and Grace is fine, just exhausted. You can go in and see them now." Cole entered the bedroom on shaking legs to find Grace propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket Grace had sewn herself. Cole approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a surprising amount of dark hair and eyes that were squeezed shut as he made small, whimpering sounds. He was the most beautiful thing Cole had ever seen, except for the woman holding him. "His name is Samuel," Grace said softly. "Samuel Cole Brennan." "Sam for short, if that meets with your approval." "It is perfect," Cole whispered, reaching out to gently touch his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around Cole's larger finger with surprising strength, and Cole felt his heart expand with a love so powerful it was almost painful. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." Grace smiled tiredly. "It is very real. And he is going to need his father to help raise him to be a good man. I hope you are ready for that responsibility." "I will do my best," Cole promised. He leaned down and kissed Grace's forehead gently. "Thank you for this gift, Grace. Thank you for our son." The months after Sam's birth were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and the constant wonder of watching a new life grow and develop. Grace proved to be a natural mother, patient and nurturing but also practical and efficient. Cole was initially nervous about holding something so small and fragile, but he quickly learned, spending hours walking the floor with Sam when the baby was fussy, changing diapers with increasing competence, and singing off-key lullabies that somehow always seemed to soothe. They settled into new rhythms as a family of three. Cole continued to build their ranch, working long days, but always making time to be with Grace and Sam. Grace managed the household and cared for their son while still helping with the ranch as she was able. They had less time alone together now, but the moments they did steal felt even more precious. One evening when Sam was about 6 months old, sleeping peacefully in the cradle Cole had built, Grace and Cole sat together on the porch in the cool spring air. Cole had his arm around Grace's shoulders and she was leaning against him, both of them tired but content. "I have been thinking about something," Grace said quietly. "About that day when I first arrived in Red Creek when I fell out of the stagecoach and you helped me. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember," Cole said. "How could I forget? That was the day that changed my life." "It changed mine too," Grace said. "And I was thinking about how I spent so many months trying to repay you for that kindness, for all your kindnesses. How I made that shirt and mended your clothes and tried to pay for meals and kept calculating what I owed you. And how patient you were with me, teaching me that love is not about keeping score." "You learned that lesson well," Cole said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You have not tried to repay me for anything in a long time now." "That is because I finally understand," Grace said. "Love truly is not a debt you owe, it is a gift you give and receive freely. And the life we have built together, this ranch, our marriage, our son, none of that is about debt or obligation. It is about two people choosing each other every day, giving freely to each other without expectation of return, building something greater than either of us could have built alone." "That is exactly right," Cole said softly. "I am proud of you for learning that, Grace. I know it was not easy to change a lifetime of thinking." Grace tilted her head back to look up at him. "You made it easier by being patient with me, by loving me even when I was being stubborn. You gave me the space to learn and grow at my own pace. That is its own kind of gift. We give to each other," Cole said. "That is what marriage is. You have given me so much, Grace. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just working to survive. You have made me a better man than I was when I was alone. That is not a debt you owe me. That is a gift you have given freely. And I am grateful for it every single day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds and watching the stars emerge. Inside the cabin, Sam made a small sound but settled back into sleep without fully waking. Grace felt a profound sense of peace, a contentment she had never known before coming to Wyoming. "I love you, Cole Brennan," she said. "Not because I owe you, not out of obligation or gratitude, but simply because you are the best man I know and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "I love you too, Grace Brennan," Cole replied, "for exactly the same reasons. And I will keep loving you for all the days of my life, with no expectation of anything in return except the privilege of being loved by you." The years that followed were full and rich. Grace and Cole added 2 more children to their family, a daughter they named Rose and another son they named Thomas. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the more successful operations in the region. They built the larger house Cole had promised, with multiple bedrooms, a proper parlor, and a kitchen large enough for Grace to cook the big family meals she loved to prepare. Sam grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's serious nature and his mother's quick mind. Rose was a bright whirlwind of energy who kept everyone on their toes. Thomas was quieter, thoughtful, with a way with animals that reminded Cole of himself at that age. Watching their children grow and thrive, Grace and Cole felt blessed beyond measure. Grace never forgot the lesson she had learned about love not being a debt. She taught it to her children, modeling it in the way she and Cole treated each other and others. She made sure her children understood that kindness should be given freely, that helping someone should never come with strings attached, and that the truest gift is one given with no expectation of return. The general store remained a fixture in Grace's life as well. Mrs. Henderson eventually retired, and, with her blessing, Grace purchased the business. She ran it while also managing their household and helping with the ranch, proving herself to be a woman of remarkable energy and capability. Cole supported her in this endeavor, never questioning her ability to manage multiple responsibilities, trusting her to know her own limits. As their children grew older and more capable, they helped on the ranch and in the store, learning the values of hard work and contribution that their parents modeled. Sam showed an aptitude for ranching that made Cole proud, often working alongside his father from dawn until dusk. Rose proved to have her mother's head for business and could frequently be found helping at the store, charming customers with her bright personality. Thomas divided his time between both, showing talent in multiple areas. One autumn evening when Sam was 15, Rose was 12, and Thomas was 9, the family gathered around the dinner table in their spacious kitchen. The children were animatedly discussing their days, talking over each other in that way of siblings comfortable with one another. Grace looked around the table at her family, her heart full nearly to bursting. After the meal, when the children had been sent off to complete their evening chores, Cole and Grace found themselves alone in the parlor. The room was cozy and warm, with a fire crackling in the fireplace and comfortable furniture that showed the signs of a well-lived life. Grace was working on mending one of Thomas's shirts while Cole reviewed the ranch accounts. "You ever think about that first day?" Grace asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "When I stumbled off that stagecoach, covered in dust with my whole life in a carpet bag," Cole looked up from the ledger and smiled. "I think about it often. I think about how lucky I was to be in town that day, to be there when you needed help. If I had been even an hour later, someone else might have offered assistance, and my whole life would be different." "Mine too," Grace said softly. "Although I spent far too long trying to repay you for that assistance instead of just accepting it as the gift it was." "But you learned," Cole pointed out. "That is what matters. And in teaching you that love is not a debt to be repaid, I think I learned it more deeply myself. Before you, I think I had never really understood how to give freely without expectation. I did kind things because they were right, but I had never really opened my heart to someone the way I did to you. You taught me about vulnerability and trust just as much as I taught you about receiving without obligation." Grace set down her mending and crossed to where Cole sat. She settled onto his lap, something she still did sometimes when they had rare private moments, and wrapped her arms around his neck. "We have built something beautiful together, haven't we? This ranch, our family, our life. It is more than I ever dreamed possible when I was traveling west with such uncertainty." "It is more than I dreamed too," Cole agreed, holding her close. "I thought I would spend my life alone, working cattle, maybe eventually buying some land but never having anyone to truly share it with. You changed everything, Grace. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, something to pass on to our children." They sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had learned the hard lessons of love and partnership, who had built a life based on mutual respect, freely given affection, and the understanding that the greatest gifts are those that come with no strings attached. Outside, the wind picked up, bringing the scent of coming rain. Inside, the fire crackled and the house settled around them with the familiar creaks and sighs of a well-loved home. As the years continued to pass, Cole and Grace grew older together, their love deepening with each shared experience, each challenge overcome, each joy celebrated. Sam eventually took over much of the daily management of the ranch, showing himself to be a capable and fair-minded young man. Rose married a good man who ran the mercantile in a neighboring town, and together they built their own successful business. Thomas decided to become a veterinarian, one of the few in the territory, using his natural gift with animals to help ranchers and farmers throughout the region. Grace and Cole became grandparents, a development that delighted them both. They loved having their grandchildren visit the ranch, teaching them to ride, telling them stories of the old days, spoiling them in the way that grandparents do. Grace particularly enjoyed telling her granddaughters about how she had met their grandfather, about the lessons she had learned about love and obligation and the importance of giving freely. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Grace with a trip to Denver, the farthest from the ranch either of them had been in years. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at elegant restaurants, and attended a theatrical performance. It was a grand adventure, and Grace loved every moment, but she found she was eager to return home to their ranch, to the life they had built together. "We do not need fancy hotels and city entertainments," she told Cole as they rode the train back to Wyoming. "Everything I need is in Red Creek in the home we built with the family we raised. That is where my heart is." "Mine too," Cole agreed. "But it was good to have this time together, just the two of us. To remember that before we were parents and grandparents and business owners, we were just Cole and Grace, two people who fell in love. We are still those people," Grace said, taking his hand. "We have just grown and expanded to include so much more. But at the core, we are still that cowboy and that stranded teacher who found each other on a dusty street in Red Creek." They returned home to find the ranch running smoothly in their absence, their children having managed everything competently. But Grace and Cole were both happy to be back, to settle into their familiar routines, to sleep in their own bed and wake to the sight of the mountains they loved. As Cole entered his late 50s and Grace her early 50s, they began to slow down somewhat, letting their children and hired hands take on more of the daily work. But they remained active and engaged, unable to fully step away from the life they had built. Cole still rode out most days to check on the cattle and fences, though he no longer worked from dawn to dusk. Grace still managed the store, though Rose's daughter had taken over much of the day-to-day operations. They took time now to do things they had not had time for in their busier years. They read together in the evenings, Grace sometimes reading aloud while Cole listened. They took long walks through their property, holding hands like young sweethearts. They hosted regular family dinners where their children and grandchildren gathered, filling the house with noise and laughter and love. One evening, sitting on the porch that had been the site of so many important conversations over the years, Grace said reflectively, "I have been thinking about legacy, about what we will leave behind when we are gone. What do you think our legacy will be, Cole?" Cole considered the question carefully before answering. "I think our legacy is not just this ranch or the businesses we built, though those are important. I think our legacy is the way we loved each other and our children. The way we showed them that true strength lies in giving freely, in helping others without expectation, in building each other up rather than keeping score. We showed them that love is not a transaction or a debt, but a freely given gift. That is what they will carry forward, and that is what they will teach their own children." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "That is a beautiful legacy. I am proud of what we built together, Cole. Not just in terms of property and success, but in terms of the life we created, the family we raised, the example we set. We started from nothing, with me literally falling in the dust, and built something lasting and meaningful. We did it together," Cole emphasized. "Neither of us could have done it alone. That is the other part of our legacy, the understanding that true partnership means both people giving their all, supporting each other, growing together. You made me a better man, Grace. You taught me about vulnerability and trust and opening my heart fully to another person. Those are gifts I will treasure for the rest of my life. And you taught me about receiving freely, about accepting help and love without feeling obligated to repay it," Grace said. "You taught me that I was worthy of love simply for being myself, not for what I could do or give or repay. That changed everything for me. It allowed me to truly open my heart and build a life I never could have imagined." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, they could see cattle grazing peacefully. Closer to the house, they could hear the sounds of their grandchildren playing, visiting for the weekend. Smoke curled from the chimney, and lamplight glowed warmly in the windows. It was a scene of domestic contentment and hard-won peace. As full darkness fell, and the stars began to emerge, brilliant and countless in the clear Wyoming sky, Grace leaned her head on Cole's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Cole asked, though there was amusement in his voice. "For everything. For stopping that day when I fell from the stagecoach. For introducing me to Mrs. Henderson. For showing me what real love looks like. For being patient with me while I learned that love is not a debt. For building this beautiful life with me, for our children and grandchildren, for every moment of these past decades. All of it." Cole turned and cupped her face gently in his weathered hands. "Grace Brennan, you do not owe me thanks for any of that. But since you insist on giving it, I will accept it with gratitude, not as payment for anything I have done, but as a gift freely given. And I give you the same thanks for all the same reasons. You have made my life richer and fuller than I ever dreamed possible." They kissed, a sweet and gentle kiss that held decades of love and commitment and shared experiences. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come on," Cole said, standing and offering his hand. "Let us go inside. I think I smell apple pie, which means one of our daughters has been baking, and we should probably rescue some before the grandchildren eat it all." Grace laughed and took his hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet. Together they walked into their home, into the warmth and light and love they had built together, knowing that they had created something that would endure long after they were gone. The story of Cole and Grace Brennan became something of a legend in Red Creek and the surrounding territory. People spoke of how they had started with nothing and built a thriving ranch through hard work and partnership. But more than that, people spoke of the way they loved each other, the obvious affection and respect that remained strong even after decades of marriage. Young couples often sought their advice, wanting to know the secret to a lasting and happy marriage. Grace always gave the same answer. "Love is not a debt you owe. It is a gift you give freely, without expectation of return. Support each other, respect each other, and remember that marriage is not about keeping score. It is about two people choosing each other every single day, through good times and hard times, and building a life together based on trust and freely given affection." Cole would nod in agreement and add, "And marry someone you genuinely like as well as love. Grace is not just my wife, she is my best friend. That makes all the difference." As they entered their 60s and then 70s, Cole and Grace finally truly retired, turning the ranch operations fully over to Sam and his family. They kept the house and a small portion of land immediately surrounding it, and they spent their final years in gentle contentment. They received regular visits from their children and growing number of grandchildren. They attended church services and town events. They spent quiet evenings reading or talking or simply sitting together in comfortable silence. When Cole was 73, he began to have trouble with his heart. The doctor from the territorial capital came and examined him, prescribing rest and limited activity. Cole chafed at the restrictions but obeyed them, not wanting to leave Grace alone. Grace nursed him tenderly, and together they faced this new challenge as they had faced every other, together with love and determination. One morning in early spring, when the prairie was just beginning to green and the air smelled of new growth and possibility, Cole did not wake up. Grace, lying beside him as she had for almost 50 years, realized he had passed peacefully in his sleep, his expression serene and at peace. The grief that washed over her was profound, but it was tempered by gratitude for the long and beautiful life they had shared together. The funeral was attended by what seemed like everyone in the territory who had known Cole. People spoke of his fairness, his integrity, his skill with cattle, and his devotion to his family. But they spoke most of all about his capacity for love, about the way he had loved Grace with a constancy and depth that had inspired everyone who knew them. Grace lived for another 3 years after Cole's death, spending that time with her children and grandchildren, helping to raise the youngest generation and passing on the wisdom she and Cole had learned over their decades together. She never remarried, content with the love she had known and the memories she carried. When she finally passed, quietly in her sleep at the age of 74, she was buried beside Cole in the cemetery overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children and grandchildren gathered to lay her to rest, sharing stories of the remarkable couple who had shown them all what true love looked like. The headstone was simple, listing their names and dates, but Sam insisted on adding one more line below Grace's name. It read, "Love is not a debt you owe." It was a fitting epitaph for a woman who had learned that lesson and had lived it every day of her married life, and for the man who had taught her that the greatest gifts are those given freely, with no expectation of return. Together, they had built not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations, teaching all who knew their story that true love is not about obligation or debt, but about two people choosing each other, supporting each other, and giving freely to each other for all the days of their lives. Their great-grandchildren still ranch that land today, and when they gather for family dinners in the house that Cole built and Grace made into a home, they tell the story of how their great-great-grandparents met. How Grace fell from a stagecoach and Cole helped her up, how she tried for months to repay his kindness, and how he taught her that love is not a debt you owe. It is a story that has been told and retold, a reminder that the best foundation for any relationship is not obligation or transaction, but freely given love, respect, and partnership. The ranch still stands as a testament to what two people can build when they work together in love and trust. The general store, now run by Grace's descendants, still serves the community. The town of Red Creek has grown and changed over the decades, but some things remain constant. The mountains in the distance, the creek that gives the town its name, and the memory of Cole and Grace Brennan, whose love story became the standard against which other loves were measured.